work prior to the petrochemical era. We've had the ability to do things that we otherwise couldn't do, and that's great. Though we have some serious risks that have been introduced because of that. We're essentially dependent on the Middle East. We have other issues in terms of the environmental pollutants and those types of things. So we need to start rethinking this situation and looking back for inspiration, not for technology and practice, but for inspiration for rethinking how we operate our systems today, where we can bring technology and knowledge to bear in terms of designing newer systems that do a better job at managing energy and every other thing. And this is probably one that gets pointed to a lot, and David may have even shown this with you here. There's 3 sisters, so this is a Native American system. Corn, bean, and squash together, produced together. The corn grows up and provides a stalk for the squash to grow up. The squash puts out big leaves that suppress weeds, and the beans produce nitrogen for the system to be optimal. Kind of an interesting thing, though we're not going to drive a combine through that. So the idea is this is an inspiration, a principle where we're producing carbohydrate and protein and fiber, as well as meeting all the ecological niches in this system. And we can look at this and say, well, what can we do to think like that with our modern technology? So one of the ones that's being worked on a bit is the idea of companion planting clover with corn. Produces the nitrogen, helps with some weed suppression. Another one that I really like, because my family's cattle farmers, is the idea of what I call the integrated cellulosic biorefinery. And that's a cow. And I think Morris Robinette was here a couple months ago and talked a lot about cows and grazing systems. This is probably the system that we have in this state that's most ready to really maximize energy efficiency per unit output. And there's been some research going on. I think Morris talked about the beefing up the Palouse project when he was here. I keep pounding my fist that we need more data out of this system. They've been doing this, rotational grazing, all this kind of stuff for a really long time. Nobody ever shows you the data. But theoretically, the yield potential of this system is higher than any of our annual cropping systems that we have per unit of area in terms of total biomass production, simply because with a grass-based system, well managed, we can maximize the water use efficiency and the nutrient use efficiency of the land. However, whether we're doing that or not, or whether we really know how to make that work, I don't know yet, because nobody ever has any data. But it's a good idea, and if you don't know the term integrated cellulosic biorefinery, that's the concept behind these 100 million gallon ethanol facilities. That's what they're calling them. And I've kind of said, well, we've got one. It's a cow. It goes out and it harvests the grass that's already there, does all that work for you, collects itself off the field, and the processing is pretty easy. So, and by the way, it recycles carbon and nutrients back on the system. So that's my favorite one. But I want to point back to the issue of nitrogen, because in terms of redesign of our systems, this is probably where we have the most potential for relatively quick impact. Nitrogen's expensive for us because we don't produce a whole lot of it here in terms of the raw product. A lot of our work has been on the emissions side and not the energy side, and this is actually, this is hot off the press and it's preliminary data, so I'm not going to let you see it for very long because we want to check it first. But it illustrates the point that I showed earlier in those first 2 pie charts where I showed nitrogen production, such a big part of the energy picture of our production system. So down here, this is wheat. I did it again. Let's see if I can figure this out this time. Whoops.
There you go.
Okay, we're there now. Okay. This is emissions, this is not energy use. So we were looking at nitrogen and carbon in this system and the emissions associated with fuel use. But here's the really important point. This is just wheat. So not looking at even a rotation, just the quote-unquote greenhouse gas impact of wheat production. Producing nitrogen is a huge chunk of the emissions of wheat production. And it's nothing you do on a farm, it's the fact that it was produced in a fertilizer plant. And even though this is emissions, the energy chart will look very similar to this. This is probably the single largest energy use in wheat-based cropping systems. If we enter a P in that rotation, we can drop that significantly. However, that's a trade-off. It's an economic trade-off. It's a total yield trade-off. So it's not like you could just say, oh, we should just substitute and have P's in every system. But it gives us something to start thinking about, that even in a wheat-based cropping system, which is a pretty simple system compared to what we can do when we have water, there are things that we can do. David Granitstein, I don't know if he talked about this at all or not, but when we look back at the Reagan study in orchard systems, he really started a lot of his work in terms of supply of nitrogen in an orchard system using understory cover crops, green manures and legumes. We have some issues with that system. Again, we have the same issue that you have with compost, that sometimes you have nitrogen when you don't want it. But he's pretty sure that we can supply all the nitrogen that our orchard systems demand with this type of technology, and he has more options with this technology than we do with, say, compost, because we can spray this out, we can mow and blow it, that kind of thing. We have some other issues in that it helps with some weed control, but it also introduces some pest issues that weren't there if we don't have that. So there's some things that have to be sorted out, but there are growers in the Wenatchee and Quincy area that are already taken off of this, and even before David's really comfortable with a lot of the research being adopted, you know, they're planting blocks with different things that he's got. So kind of an interesting thing. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of oilseeds as a rotation crop. This is canola, obviously. One of the things that we found is, even though this particular farmer was losing money on canola, he found that he actually made more money on a rotation that went fallow winter wheat, fallow canola, than he did on fallow winter wheat. And that's just because he had better weed management and disease management by diversifying that crop. Another interesting thing that we've seen with Nebraska is the mustard green manures, and I'm sure if you drive through the basin at this time of year, you'll see these. And basically coming in for the potato crop, growing this mustard crop in 60 to 75 days, they grow 10 to 12,000 pounds of biomass, so it uses a lot of water, a lot of nitrogen. But what they found, and this is Dale Geese, potato producer, is he's actually been able to substitute this practice for metam-sodium as a fumigant. Not everybody who's using this has been able to do that, but what he's done is he's actually gone to a rotation that's wheat, mustard in the fall, potatoes the next year, back to wheat. So he grows potatoes every other year on his ground. Imagine what that does to the economics of his system. Virtually everybody else who grows potatoes, it's no sooner than the fourth year back. And not to mention that, but all the other benefits that he's getting from this crop in terms of soil health, his potato yields are off the charts. Now, all the pathologists at WSU say sooner or later he's going to run into a problem. You just can't keep doing that, keep pushing the system. But he hasn't yet. You know, he's into this for 14 years now. Italians are doing this, everybody else is doing it. We've just secured some pretty significant funding to start really looking at this system to try and understand the mechanism of what's going on, so that we can say we can use this technology, this practice more predictably. Probably 3 years from really having a good idea on that. But, you know, it worked. And it worked pretty quick. So in 1999, that was Dale Geese's farm. And very quickly, a lot of people started using this. And what we found is we got up to this point